In the last video, we looked at variables and operators. In this video, we're going to look at some more complicated variable types that incorporate other types. So that's going to include what we call lists and dictionaries. If you have experience in computer science outside of this, then lists are pretty much the same as arrays in Python, and dictionaries are the same as a map or an associative array, if you're familiar with those terms. But let's begin with lists. Lists are a really easy thing to understand, a really natural thing to understand. So we can have lists of all different kinds of values. Let's start with a list of numbers. I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it numList for a list of numbers, right? And in Python, typically when we have variables that are multiple words, named with multiple words, we separate those words with underscores. That's just a convention, but it's a nice convention to follow, and other people that use Python will recognize that and respect you for your style. So I've got a list of numbers, and the way we create a list is we use square brackets. So I'm going to open a square bracket, and I'm going to write my list of numbers. And these numbers don't matter. I'm going to say 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. So you can see that my numbers are separated by commas. That's important when we're creating a list, and we close the list with a closed square bracket. If we hit return there, that assignment has happened. So remember that single equal sign means assignment. And if I type numList and evaluate that variable, it will show me my list of numbers. And so I now have a variable that's set not just to a single value, but to a whole list of values. And one of the great things you can do with lists is what we call index them. And so what that means is we can individually refer to each item in the list. And we do that as well with square brackets. And if you're not used to programming or computer science, this next part might sound a little bit strange, but the way that we address individual values in a list is by their position. That makes sense. But the first position is position 0, not position 1. So for instance, if I want to get to the 2, I need to type my variable name, a bracket, and then position 0, close bracket. What this is saying is give me the value that's in position 0, which is the first position. And if I do that, it will return 2 to me. The second position is position 1, right? So in Python, like many other computer programming languages, lists, arrays, these types of variables are indexed 0-based, not 1-based. The last item, if I count the items here, I see that I have 4, 5, 6 items. So therefore, the last item is not the 6th item, right? If I try to do that, it'll give me an error that my index is out of range. Because though there are 6 items, they are numbered 0 through 5. And so the last item is in position number 5. And so there we go, right? In Python, you can also index from the back. And to do that, we use negative numbers. So if I want the last item, another way to say that is give me 1 back from the end. Or I guess I should say the first one from the end. And that's even maybe a little bit more confusing because, the first item is in position 0, but the last item is in, the first one back from the end. So if I said numList sub negative 2, that would be the second one back from the end. That's the 11, right? And so that's how we can do things with lists. Now, I had a list of numbers here, but we can have a list of any kind of variable, any kind of type, value type. And so maybe I want a list of names, right? So I'm going to make a list of names, name list. Again, it's a square bracket, but instead of numbers here, I'm going to have strings. And I'm going to give a list of names. Let's say we have 5 names. Again, if I type my names list, it will evaluate that and give me back the list of names. I can set values equal to an index of that list. So like let's say I want the 5th person in that list. Well, I would put a square bracket and the number 4, right? Not the number 5 because it's 0 indexed. And I'm assigning the name in position number 4, which is the fifth name, to the variable name. So I'm creating a new variable called name, assigning it to the last person in this case. So if I type name, I see, oh, that's Sahil. Okay, so same kinds of assignments that we've been doing before, but now we have this additional type that holds a list of values. Now we might want to add to this list. What if I want to add another person to the list? Well, I can't say like, oh, that's a 5, right? The next item equals Stephen. It'll give me an error because that's out of range. There are only 5 items here, and I'm trying to refer to the 6th one. So in order to do that, I have to use what's called a function. And lists have a function called append, which means add to the end. And so I would append the name to the end of that list. And now, if I look at that list, it has 6 items, and I can refer to that 6th item using index 5. Okay? Now, it is possible to change items in a list as well. So if I want to change the first one, and I want to make that something else, then I can refer to that by its index, and it will change the list. Other interesting things I can do with lists are what's called a slice. Okay, and a slice means take part of a list. So, for instance, what if I want the first 3 names of the list? Dina, Abby, and Shep. So I can say names list sub, and I give it 2 indices. The first index, and then up to but not including the second index. So what is this saying? It's saying give me the first 3 names in indices 0, 1, and 2, up to but not including the second index 3. So just be careful about that. So that's called a slice. It's a part of a list. I can start that slice at a different position, like 1, and go up to 3. And that gives me, starting in index 1, up to but not including index 3. Maybe I want all of the names from the beginning to but not including the one in index 4. If I leave off the first number, that assumes a 0 as the first number. And so I get the first 4 names. Maybe I want all the names starting at position index 3, which is the 4th one, to the end. If I leave off the second number, then I get an assumption that we're going to the end of the list. And so I get 0, 1, 2, 3, and then through the end of the list. Interestingly, if I look at my name, which was Sahil, I said that earlier, strings themselves are, they're not lists, but they're sequences. So we can do the same kinds of things with strings that we do with lists. So if I say name sub 0, well, that means the first character in Sahil. And so that's the capital S. And I can do the same kind of slicing as well. So that's something interesting to notice. Okay. So those are lists. We also want to look at a data type called a dictionary, which associates keys and values together in pairs. And so what the heck does that mean? Well, it's often the case that we might want to store data that we want to index not by a position, but by a name, for instance, right? So like look at the following dictionary that I'm about to make. We might have a list of months, and the months contains the name of the month and then the number of days in that month, right? So the key, if you will, would be the name of the month, and the value that's associated with that key would be the number of days in that month. So January has a value of 31, and so a couple things to notice as we define a dictionary in contrast to a list. When we made a list, we placed the values in square brackets. Okay. When we're defining a dictionary, we use a curly brace. We follow that curly brace with a key And that key, in this case is a string, but it might be a value of another type, like an integer, or it could be anything. But my key in this case is a string, and then a colon, and then the value associated with that key. Okay, so January has a value of 31 associated with it. I want to do the same thing for the other months. So I'm going to continue associating key value pairs by separating those key value pairs with commas. Um, forgive me for taking the time to do this, but we need a good little dictionary here. So I'm going to pause the video while I finish the dictionary, and then we'll continue. Okay, so I've completed my dictionary, and you can see I've got 11 of the months in there with their number of days for each month. And I'm going to hit enter there, and that will create my dictionary. If I type months and evaluate that, it spits back the dictionary, and I can see that. Now, let's say I wanted to add to this dictionary first off, right? So I notice, oh, I only have 11 months. I don't have December in there. Well, I can do that differently than I would with lists. In lists, I couldn't simply use the next index because it would give me an index out of range. But in dictionaries, we can simply add to the dictionary by adding a key value pair. And the way we do that is we use a square bracket, not a curly brace. Okay, so months square bracket, and I put in the key December, and I set that value, the value for that key, equal to the number of days that I want, 31. Okay, and now if I retype that, I can see that December is in there with 31. Now you might notice something odd or seemingly odd about what I've just done or what was just spit out. Notice that the keys are not in the order in which I had typed them. That's because dictionaries don't have an order to them in the sense of the way that they're stored or spit out. We don't care what order these are stored in. We only care about being able to access the values in the dictionary based on their keys. I want to know how many days does February have? 28, right? So I address by the key February, not by a position, as opposed to a list, where the list always had the same order to it based on the original order it was typed in. Okay? A dictionary doesn't behave that way, and it doesn't matter that it does. So you can see even between the two times that I evaluated the months variable, the order of the items changed. So that's just something to notice and not try to rely on the dictionary being in a certain order. It's not necessary. What if I want to actually see a value for a certain dictionary item? So I want to know how many days does June have? So I say months, and I use the key June as sort of the index into the dictionary. And if I evaluate that, I see, oh, 3, that's not right. June doesn't have 3 days, and it's 30 days. I must have mistyped that. So I can see how to access the information in the dictionary. Now let's go ahead and change that to the correct value. So months, so June, I want that to be 30. So I can set that value that way. And now if I check it again, I get that value. I might sometimes want to know what is the list of keys in the dictionary. There's what we call a function for that. We're going to be talking about functions in the next video. And that function is called keys. So if I say months dot keys, this is how we say that, it's a period, months dot keys, that means give me the keys, the set of keys for this dictionary. And those are the names of the months. Notice again, they're not in any order, right? So we don't want to rely on them being in the order that we typed them in. I can do the same thing for the values. What are the values in this dictionary? And it will give me the values. Again, those aren't in any order that I can rely upon, but these are the values in the dictionary. So typically when we are trying to get values from a dictionary, we are using the key as the way to access those values, not trying to rely on a list that's returned by this values function. But those are the basics of lists and dictionaries. We'll be using those in our projects. And so hopefully that's a good intro for you. In the next video, we're going to be looking at functions and how we can start to use variables of different types to actually perform some things of significance.